down in Alexander Dock here, in front of HMS Caroline, a ship that's been here since 1924.
HMS Caroline, Pete, was the first of a class of 6 new warships, and they were called Caroline-class light cruisers. Designed around about 1912 time, around about the same time as the Titanic was on her maiden voyage. She was laid down in January 1914, launched in September of that year, and went to sea operationally in December. That makes her the fastest built major warship the Royal Navy's ever had. She served operationally for several years, most notably at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, the biggest naval battle of the First World War. She's the only ship of her type left in the world from the Battle of Jutland. Eventually her operational service came to an end in 1922 when she was laid up on the south coast of England, awaiting a future. Then in 1924 the decision was taken to form a naval division, a Royal Naval Reserve division in Belfast, and she was sent here to be the headquarters ship of the Naval Reserve Division. Came here in 1924, slightly after partition, so very sensitive time. Her guns were removed so that there was no perceived threat to anybody. She was here purely for training reservists to support the regulars in time of war, and she performed that role right through to 2009, almost without a break. The only difference being in the Second World War, she was actually the headquarters ship of the Royal Navy in Belfast itself, not in a reserve unit, but in an operational role.
When I came down to the Caroline, it was just immediately after the air raids. So the city was in quite a mess, and Caroline was over in Pollock Dock then. Basically, it was administration. Caroline was used for during the war. Mostly the papers to do with the sailors on board the ships. We had to be sure you had the correct papers for the ships that were going out.
Well, Martin, we're on the deck of HMS Caroline now at the bow. Just tell me a bit about the design of the ship.
The ship was designed to be a scout. She was designed to be fast and agile and to be able to get ahead of the main battle fleet, big battleships, 20, 30,000 tons. She was designed to get out so she could stay within distance, spot the enemy, and then report back by signal that the enemy was sighted so that the Admiral could decide his strategy for engagement of the enemy. She was a disposable ship. She
would have played the role that a modern-day destroyer would have played, a fast ship.
Very much that. She is long, she's slim. She had 4 shafts, she had big sort of steam turbines. This ship was designed to be a racehorse, really fast through the water, but probably not the best sea-keeping ship the Navy's ever built.
So she didn't want to get into engagements with heavier ships?
She wanted to get close, she wanted to find out what the enemy looked like, how many there were, report it back. And if she could fire torpedoes, that was the main offensive weapon of this ship against a bigger ship, fire the torpedoes and get out of there. If she needed to defend herself or to engage with ships of a similar size, she had 6 and 4-inch guns to be able to do that.
This was in the days before radar, which plays a key role in naval battles now, but in those days, I mean, there was no radar, it was Mark 1 eyeball.
Yes, it was. Radio may have been used, but the Royal Navy relied on centuries-old tradition of line of sight, flag hoists, and making signals to each other through flashing lights. That was the accurate way of communicating with each other at the Battle of Jutland.
Just looking back down the ship, Martin, the bridges behind us here, very, very exposed compared to a modern-day warship.
Yes, the Caroline-class ships were very agricultural because of the way they were designed and the job they were designed to do. The bridge was exposed, so people were wearing layers of clothes, duffel coats, lots of hot drinks, and of course the lookouts were at the top of the mast, guys with the best eyesight and those who were able to see the furthest. The mast height was as high as it could possibly be in the ship, and it gave extra vision of about an extra 5 or 6 miles over the horizon. That was the advantage that a high mast gave.
And obviously in those days the lookouts would have been looking for smoke.
Most ships in that time were coal-fired or oil-fired, and therefore smoke was an unavoidable hazard of being in a ship at sea. That's exactly what we were looking out for.
the convoys that were going up to Russia. Some of them suffered rather badly with icing. One particular one didn't come, I remember it quite well, didn't come back. It apparently iced over and turned over. They were all lost. It was terribly sad. As convoys came in, you sort of heard whether they were all back or not. Sad, really. I remember the day the Hood was sunk. We knew she was in battle because on the upper deck, the signals were coming in there, and then we heard she was lost.
I know that was a terrible loss of life.
Dreadful day, it really was.
The wheelhouse in a ship like this in 1914 was a mechanical place. This is where all of the controls and the instructions were passed to the engineers and those who were operating the ship. So we've got the ship's compass for direction, so we've got bearing, and we know where we're heading to. We've got telegraphs for the port and starboard engines so that we can give independent instructions through mechanical linkages about the amount of power we want and which way we expect the propellers to be turning. And here we've got the rudder control table. This was an electromechanical device very, very early on in the 1914 period, where the ship would be able to send electrical signals right back aft to the steering compartment so that the men operating down there would know which way to turn the ship's rudder. Very important communication tool. Above here is the flying bridge, as it's known in a ship. It's totally exposed to the elements. That's where the captain and all of his senior staff would be, looking at the enemy, making sure they know where all of their own fleet is, and sending signals through voice pipes to this control area, which then forwards them on through the ship.
Right, let's go up onto the flying bridge then and have a look at the views from up there. Well, Martin, we're up now on the flying bridge, very exposed up here, and mid-Atlantic would have been a terrible place to be.
Absolutely dreadful. We're talking about a time when everything was made of wool or cotton. You were lucky if you had layers. The guys out here were out here for 3 or 4 hours at a time, trying to keep their vision, sort of trying to see what was going on. Huge amounts of noise, smoke billowing around from the funnels behind us. So quite a difficult place to be. But this is where the ship was fought from. This is where the captain needed to be. Captain of this ship was up here for hours and hours on end, controlling what was going on and giving his directions.
And again, then above us is the crow's nest, where because of the height you got the maximum view over the horizon.
You did. That extra 20 or 30 feet made a huge difference. It was an extra 4 or 5 miles in terms of seeing early smoke from a scouting ship from the opposition fleet. Being able to position yourself ready for battle was a key strategy that everybody needed to be on top of. So the higher the mast, the greater the vision.
Her chief role was to train reserve naval officers and ratings. Britain had to provide for NATO a minesweeping force, and that minesweeping force consisted of the 10th Minesweeping Squadron, and it was controlled by the RN, but the RNR, or in those days when I originally joined, the RNVR, had to provide crews for these minesweepers. We also were training up officers of various kinds and various specializations. I mean, dentists, doctors, engineers, more than we needed for the purpose of the minesweepers, but for the general good of the Navy.
Well, Martin, now we're in one of the 3 galleys aboard HMS Caroline. Just tell us about the function of this.
This is the forward galley in the ship. This is where the majority, the junior rates of the ship's company, who were the majority of the ship's company, would have been fed. This galley would have been in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, baking bread overnight, rolls, loaves, those sort of things, and then during the morning preparing food and cooking it through, so they were producing hot meals. This galley typically could have been preparing and cooking food for 200 men. The officers' mess galley back aft considerably less, maybe only 20 or 30 officers, and then the other galley for the senior rates. Food at the time, of course, there were no fridges, so most of the fresh food after a ship sailed was kept on the upper deck in screens or lockers, and beef would have been in a beef screen. Meat would have figured highly on the menu, and meat would have been sort of on the agenda every day for the ship's company. I mean, these are hard-working men who need an awful lot of calories, probably into a range of 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day to do the work they were doing.
Let's go forward in the ship now and have a look at some of the accommodation where the men stayed when they were off duty.
Okay.
Well, Martin, we're right up in the bow of the ship now. We can see the curvature of the hull here, right in the front part of the ship. We can see the rivets, which obviously formed the construction of the ship. Just explain to us what way a ship would have been built in that period.
This is the classic Titanic construction. So the designer would have had plates fabricated, bent slightly to give curvature. They would have been matched, holes would have been drilled in them, and then the hot rivets would have been put through mandrolically. One man on one side of the plate, another on the other, with a riveting gun or a riveting hammer. When the rivets go cold, of course, it pulls the metal together and you get that watertight seal. A ship like this would have had several 100,000 rivets and a number of thousands of plates. The idea of the armour was that it would give some degree of protection against a torpedo. It may not completely save the ship, but it would give the men time to escape if it did its job. Classically, though, in a ship like this, it was speed that kept the ship away from any danger.
So what would this space we're in now have been used for when the ship was active?
This is the space where the most junior of ratings in the ship would have slept, and they would have slung their hammocks in here. Literally, they would have been hooked into the deckhead, into eyelets. They'd have slept there overnight when they were off watch, and during the day when they were at work, the hammocks would have been taken out onto the upper deck to be aired, or they'd have been rolled up and folded out of the way. The last thing you need when you're in action is hammocks and debris all over the place. So they're incredibly tidy people. That's the way the Navy operates.
Yeah, well, I was in the naval section of the Combined Cadet Force of Campbell College. So at the age of 13, 1953, we were based down here. We came down here for training in seamanship, and we fired rifles on the small bore range, with the starboard side there as you come aboard, which is dismantled. Every cadet at that time had to shoot the Empire test with a rifle. And I actually have my marksman's badge. We also did drill in the main drill hall, of course, and learnt knots and splices. And there were boats tied up to the boom on the port side forward there. We learnt to pull and sail both cutters and whalers.
Let's go down below into the engine rooms and see the driving force of the ship.
Well, Pete, this is the main access to the main machinery space. That's where the ship's engines are situated, the largest compartment within the ship. Down there waiting for us is Lieutenant Commander Martin Browning, who was previously an executive officer of HMS Caroline and something of an expert in these engines.
We're in the engine room, standing here in front of one of the four